Billionaire's car broke down in a small town. A waitress offered him coffee and kindness. The night had swallowed the interstate in rain and fog when Alexander Vale's car sputtered, coughed, and died at the edge of a nowhere town. He had built empires across continents, silenced entire boardrooms with a glance. But that night, under the flickering neon of a half-lit gas station sign, he looked like a man who had run out of control. The sleek black car sat useless beside him, steam rising from the hood like a wounded animal. He cursed under his breath and checked his phone. No signal, only static rain against glass and the faint rhythmic hum of thunder in the distance. He stepped out into the cold night, pulling his coat tighter. Tailored wool, worth more than most people made in a month, and for the first time in years, he felt small. Half a mile ahead, a sign glowed faintly through the fog, Maple Diner. He walked. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. The bell above the door chimed softly when he entered. The place smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and old stories. A jukebox whispered from the corner, and a handful of locals sat nursing late-night cups, half listening to the rain outside. And behind the counter, wiping a cup with quiet rhythm, stood her, Mara Ellison. Her hair was tied loosely, a few golden strands catching the amber light. She looked up when he entered, not startled, not curious, just present. That simple kind of attention that didn't need to impress anyone. "Rough night?" she asked. His voice was clipped, businesslike. "Car broke down," she nodded, gesturing toward the counter. "Sit. You look like you could use something warm." He hesitated, unused to being told what to do, then took a seat. The stool creaked under him. She poured coffee without asking how he liked it, set it in front of him and added softly, "It's on the house." He frowned. "You don't even know me," she smiled faintly. "You look like someone who forgot what warmth tastes like." He blinked, unsure whether to be offended or intrigued. The coffee smelled rich, honest. He lifted the cup and took a sip. It wasn't perfect, a little too bitter, but it was real. And in that moment it felt like the only thing in his world that was. "Do you always offer free coffee to strangers?" he asked. "Only to the ones who look like they've been driving too fast for too long," she said, leaning her hip against the counter, something in her tone calm, unhurried, unsettled him more than any corporate rival ever had. "Alexander," he said finally, as if his name itself should mean something here. "Mara," she replied, and for a second their eyes met, hers open and curious, his guarded, calculating. He glanced around the diner. Old photos lined the walls. A baseball team from decades ago. A family gathered under a maple tree, laughter frozen in black and white. "This place hasn't changed in a while," he muttered. "Why should it?" she said simply. "People come here for what's constant. You don't fix what feeds the heart." He didn't reply. He just studied her. The steady way she moved, the ease in her gestures, the way she smiled at every customer like they mattered. It was a language he had forgotten how to speak. "Need me to call a mechanic?" she asked. "There's no signal," he said. "Phone's useless." "Then use the landline in the back. Charlie's the only mechanic still awake at this hour. Takes him a while, but he's honest." He stared at her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Thank you." As he walked toward the back, Mara watched him. The precision in his stride, the way his eyes missed nothing, the faint exhaustion buried beneath all that polish. She didn't know who he was yet, but something about him felt like a man who had spent too long surviving and forgot how to live. When he returned, she was setting a plate in front of him. Pancakes. The smell filled the air, warm and simple. "I didn't order this, I know," she said. "You haven't eaten." He gave a small, incredulous laugh. "You're very presumptuous. You're very hungry." He looked down at the plate, then at her. For a moment, the weight of his world, the contracts, the negotiations, the endless perfection, slipped away. He picked up the fork. They didn't speak for a while. The diner hummed softly around them. Somewhere the rain began to ease. Mara refilled his cup, her eyes meeting his. "You pass through here often?" "Never been here before." "Then maybe it's about time," she said with a quiet smile. He looked at her, really looked. The freckles on her cheek, the faint tiredness in her eyes that still held light. And for reasons he didn't understand, something inside him stirred. He didn't know that her kindness would undo everything he thought he knew about people, and she didn't know that the man sitting at her counter would change her life forever. Outside, headlights broke through the fog, the mechanic arriving. But Alexander didn't stand. He stayed seated, his fingers tracing the edge of the coffee cup, his eyes still on her. "You said your name was Mara." "Yes," he hesitated. "Thank you. For what?" "For not asking who I am." She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe I care more about what you are right now than who you were before you walked in." He didn't know how to answer that. So he didn't. He just looked at her. This woman who spoke to him like he wasn't a brand or a number or a story in the papers. "Just a man in need of warmth. Coffee's getting cold," she said softly. He smiled for the first time in months. "Then I guess I'll have to stay for a refill." The bell over the door jingled again as the mechanic entered, shaking rain from his jacket. But Alexander didn't turn right away. For the first time, he wasn't in a hurry to leave. Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people. By morning, the storm had cleared. The sun hung low over the hills, painting the small town in shades of gold and quiet forgiveness. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly in the light. Maple Diner, open since 1954. Alexander sat in the corner booth, coffee steaming beside him, his suit jacket folded neatly over the chair. The night's chaos had left his car in the mechanic's shop and his schedule in ruins, but strangely he didn't care. For the first time in years, there was no ringing phone. No assistant sending him updates. No pressure to perform. Just the scent of pancakes and the sound of Mara humming softly behind the counter. She noticed him watching her reflection in the chrome of the coffee machine and smiled without turning. "You're still here," he shrugged lightly. "Nowhere else to go until Charlie finishes with my car. You can walk around," she said. "There's a park by the river, a bookstore on Main Street. People here still talk to strangers." "I've had enough strangers for a lifetime," he said. She looked over her shoulder, studying him. "Maybe that's the problem." He didn't reply, but her words lingered. Mara approached his booth with a fresh cup. "You want breakfast again?" "I'm not sure my body remembers what breakfast tastes like," he said dryly. She set the cup down and smirked. "Then it's a good morning to relearn." He studied her the way she spoke, unguarded, effortless. She moved like someone who didn't owe the world anything. "Do you ever get tired of this?" he asked suddenly. "Serving coffee to the same faces every day?" Her expression softened. "No, I like it. People come in heavy and leave lighter. Not because of me, so because this place doesn't expect them to be anything they're not." He looked down at his hands, the faint scuffs on his expensive watch. "You talk like you figured something out that the rest of us missed. Maybe I've just stopped chasing things that don't make me feel alive," she said. Then added with a half smile, "You look like someone who's been chasing ghosts." That made him laugh quietly, a sound he wasn't used to hearing from himself. "You're not wrong." They fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously natural. Mara poured refills without asking, and Alexander found himself staying long after his coffee turned cold. He watched as she joked with the regulars, patted a child on the shoulder, and remembered each person's story as if it mattered. There was something grounding about her. Something real when the door opened and Charlie, the mechanic, stepped in, wiping his hands on a rag. The world of responsibility snapped back into focus. "Mr. Vale," Charlie said, tipping his cap, "your car's good to go. Just a bad sensor and some water in the fuel line." "She's running like new." Mara looked at Alexander, her expression unreadable. "Guess that's your cue." He stood, adjusting his cuffs, his voice more formal now. "Thank you for your help." She nodded politely, like she was saying goodbye to any other traveler. "Safe drive." He paused by the door, wanting to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. So he just nodded once more and stepped out into the sunlight. The air smelled of rain and asphalt. The car gleamed good as new. Charlie waited beside it. "Appreciate it," Alexander said, reaching for his wallet. Charlie raised a hand. "Already paid," Alexander frowned. "By who?" Charlie smiled faintly. "Mara said you looked like the type who wouldn't take charity, so she beat you to it." He stood there stunned. The idea that someone like her, someone with so little but would pay for him, felt absurd, unthinkable. Yet there it was. He glanced back at the diner. Through the window he saw her laughing with a customer, sunlight glinting off her hair. He slid his wallet back into his jacket and walked slowly toward the door. When she noticed him re-entering, surprise flickered in her eyes. "Forget something?" He approached the counter. "You paid for my car." "I did. Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because sometimes people help other people. No reason required. That's not how the world works. Maybe not in your world," she said softly. He hesitated, then took a folded check from his wallet, his company's embossed logo printed at the top. He began writing, but she shook her head. "Don't," she said gently. "It's too much," he insisted. She smiled. "You think kindness is a debt to be settled." It's not. Something inside him cracked. Something he hadn't realized was hollow until now. He looked at her, really looked, and saw that she wasn't trying to make him feel small. She was reminding him what enough looked like. He folded the check slowly, placed it on the counter anyway. "Consider it a donation to your philosophy," she laughed quietly. "You're impossible. And you're dangerous," he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes widened. "Dangerous?" He leaned closer, his voice low. "Because people like you make people like me remember what being human feels like." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with something unspoken, fragile and alive. Then a voice called from behind the counter, the manager reminding Mara her shift wasn't over. She blinked, stepping back, breaking the spell. "Goodbye, Alexander." He gave a faint nod and turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he stopped. "You said people come here heavy and leave lighter." "You were right." And with that, he was gone. Mara stood there for a long time after, staring at the empty booth he had left behind. What she didn't know was that Alexander Vale, the billionaire who had never stayed anywhere he didn't own, drove 3 miles down the road and stopped. He looked at the check in his pocket, at the town fading in his rearview mirror, and realized he had no idea why he didn't want to leave it behind. He turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. And then, for the first time in his adult life, he reversed the car, heading back toward the little diner that had reminded him what warmth tasted like. When the bell over the diner door chimed again, Mara almost didn't look up. She was balancing 2 plates in one hand and refilling a cup for a trucker in the other. The morning rush had come and gone, and the place was slowly returning to its usual calm. But when she finally turned, her breath caught. Alexander Vale stood there again, the man who wasn't supposed to return. The man who belonged in boardrooms and headlines, not beneath the flickering neon of Maple Diner. She tried to sound casual. "Forgot your briefcase?" He smiled slightly. "I don't carry one. I came back for the coffee." "The coffee," she repeated, skeptical. "Not the pancakes you didn't order." "Those too," he said, slipping into the same stool as the night before. Mara poured him a cup without another word, but her hands were slower this time. He noticed. Everything about her he noticed. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The way her eyes searched his face like she was still trying to figure out what kind of man he was. "So," she said, placing the cup in front of him. "No car trouble this time." "No," he said. "Just a quiet morning and no one waiting for me." "You're not the type to have no one waiting." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I'm the type who doesn't know what to do when they stop." Something about that confession pulled at her. "You lose someone." He looked into his cup. "Not someone, something, maybe myself." She leaned on the counter, studying him. "Then maybe it's good your car broke down." He met her gaze. "You think fate runs on bad timing and engine failure?" "I think fate uses whatever it has to slow us down." He chuckled softly. "You talk like a philosopher." "I talk like someone who's had to make peace with staying put." He tilted his head. "You ever want to leave?" She paused. "Once, but my mother got sick and I stayed." By the time she passed, leaving didn't make sense anymore. "This town, it's home now. And you're content?" "I'm alive," she said with a small shrug. "That's enough." He looked at her for a long time, his usual detachment replaced by something else, envy. Outside, the rain that had threatened all morning began to fall again, softly tapping the windows. He took another sip, his voice quieter. "You know what's strange? I've been in rooms full of people, and I've never felt as seen as I do right now." Mara hesitated, her throat tightening. "Maybe you've been looking in the wrong rooms." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but was full of everything neither dared say. She turned to break the moment. "You want breakfast again?" He nodded, and she moved to the kitchen window to place the order. When she returned, he was watching the rain through the glass, his reflection framed by neon and thunderclouds. "You ever wonder," he said, Why people run toward everything that hurts them. Money, status, noise. It's like we're allergic to peace, because peace feels like emptiness to people who don't trust silence, she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his chest shifted. He was supposed to be driving back to the city, to meetings, to decisions worth millions, but right now none of that felt real. Only this, her voice, the smell of coffee, the hum of rain. Can I ask you something? She said suddenly. He nodded. Who are you when no one's watching? He froze for a heartbeat. The question sliced through his carefully built armor like light through fog. He opened his mouth to answer, but closed it again, unsure if he even knew. Mara smiled gently as if she understood. That's what I thought. The kitchen bell rang and she turned away to grab his plate. He exhaled, trying to steady himself. When she placed the pancakes in front of him, he said quietly, "You ask dangerous questions." "And you give careful answers," she replied. "We're even." He picked up the fork but didn't eat. "You really think people like me can change?" She thought for a moment. "I think everyone can remember who they were before the world told them to be someone else." He didn't speak again. He just stared at her, feeling something dangerous, not attraction but recognition. Like he was standing in front of the first person who'd seen the truth behind his polished disguise. The diner emptied as the afternoon wore on. The rain eased, replaced by quiet sunlight slanting through the windows. Mara wiped down the counter, glancing at him every so often, pretending not to. Finally, she said, "You know, you're starting to look less like a stranger." He smiled faintly. "And you're starting to look like the only person I've met in years who doesn't want anything from me." She tilted her head. "How do you know I don't?" He leaned in slightly, voice low. "Because if you did, you'd have already asked." Her pulse quickened, but she masked it with a smile. "Maybe I'm just patient." He laughed softly, a sound that felt like the first real thing to escape him in months. The door opened and a gust of cool air swept in. An older man stepped in, nodding toward Mara. "You closing early, sweetheart? Storm's coming back." "Maybe," she said, glancing at the dark clouds gathering again. Alexander looked at his watch. "I should probably head out before the roads flood again." "You'll get caught," she said, half warning, half plea. "Then I'll stay." She looked up sharply, caught off guard. "You will?" He smiled faintly. "I think fate's not finished slowing me down yet." She tried to reply, but the words wouldn't come. Outside, the sky rumbled again, low, steady, inevitable. And somewhere deep inside, both of them knew, some storms don't come to destroy. They come to change what survives. The rain returned heavier that evening, drumming against the diner's windows like a heartbeat. The lights inside flickered softly, casting gold reflections over the chrome counter and checkered floor. Mara locked the front door halfway to keep the few late-night wanderers out, but she didn't tell Alexander to leave. He was still there, sitting at the same stool. His magenta tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the image of a man who had nowhere else to be. "You sure you don't have a plane to catch or an empire to run?" she teased gently, pouring him another cup of coffee. He smiled faintly. "Empires survive a night without me." "Yeah, I'm not so sure about me without this coffee, though." She laughed softly, and he realized how much he loved that sound. Light, real, and unpolished. For a man who lived surrounded by boardrooms full of people trying to impress him, there was something revolutionary about someone who simply was. "Seriously," she said, leaning her elbows on the counter, "you must have people looking for you." He looked into the dark reflection of the coffee. "They'll assume I'm in a meeting." "I always am." "Always?" He nodded. "Always." Her gaze softened. "Sounds lonely." He shrugged, but there was no denial. "It's efficient." She frowned a little. "You talk about life like it's a spreadsheet." "I've built everything I have by making numbers obey me," he said quietly. "Emotions don't obey. They break you." She tilted her head. "Or they fix what's broken." He didn't reply. He couldn't. There was too much truth in that for a man who'd spent years avoiding it. A flash of lightning illuminated the diner, followed by a deep rumble that shook the floor. Mara looked out the window and sighed. "Looks like you're not going anywhere tonight." He smiled softly. "Wouldn't dream of it." She shook her head but smiled back. "There's a motel 2 blocks down if you don't mind the sound of the ice machine coughing every 5 minutes. He hesitated. "You think I should go?" "I think you're used to comfort," she said, drying a glass with her towel. "This town isn't built for men like you." Maybe that's the point, he said quietly, her hands stilled. What do you mean? He exhaled. I built a life so big it suffocates me. This little place, this silence, it feels like breathing, she met his eyes. Then breathe while you can, because silence doesn't last forever. The thunder rolled again and the power flickered, then went out. The diner plunged into darkness, except for the dim glow of a single emergency light above the counter. Mara groaned. Not again. Third time this week, Alexander chuckled. You keep candles here? She nodded toward the shelf behind her. By the pies. Right next to civilization's last hope, lemon meringue. He stood walking around the counter before she could stop him. Let me help. You don't strike me as the candle-lighting type, she teased. I can learn, he said, striking a match. The tiny flame illuminated his face, the sharp jaw, the faint scar near his chin, the quiet sadness that never seemed to leave his eyes. He lit a few candles and set them on the counter. Their golden glow softened everything, the walls, the rain outside, even him. Mara folded her arms, watching. Not bad. Maybe there's hope for you yet. He looked at her through the flickering light. You make it sound like I need saving. She smiled faintly. Everyone does. Some just hide it better. The rain outside grew heavier. Lightning flashed, painting the diner in white for an instant. And in that instant, he saw her clearly, the strength behind her calm, the quiet dignity in her posture, the life she carried in her eyes. What do you see? She asked softly. He blinked. Excuse me? You were staring, she said, her voice teasing but low, intimate. He hesitated. I was trying to remember the last time someone looked at me the way you do. And how's that? Like I'm human. Her throat tightened. Maybe you should start believing it, he smiled sadly. That's harder than you think. The storm raged outside. Inside, time slowed. They sat across from each other, two people who had no business sharing a night like this. A billionaire haunted by his own empire, and a waitress who'd long stopped believing in rescue stories. But something invisible bridged the space between them. The kind of connection that doesn't ask for permission. That doesn't make sense until it's too late. She poured herself a cup and joined him at the counter. You know, she said, you never told me your name. He smiled, as if deciding whether to lie. Alexander. Alexander what? He hesitated. Vale, her brows lifted. As in Vale Enterprises? He nodded, almost embarrassed. Mara let out a low whistle. So the rumors about the man who buys dying companies and strips them for profit, that's you? His expression darkened slightly. You make it sound simpler than it is. I make it sound true, he didn't argue. She leaned closer. You don't even flinch when people hate you for it. He looked down. I stopped caring what people think when I realized most of them only wanted what I had. And what is it you have, exactly? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He met her eyes. Everything that means nothing. The rain softened to a steady whisper. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, humming with tension, curiosity, something fragile neither of them dared name. Mara finally stood, her voice gentle but firm. There's a spare cot in the back room. You can sleep there. The motel's probably flooded by now. He looked at her, searching her face for hesitation. There was none. Just quiet kindness, the kind that didn't pity, only offered. Why are you being so kind to me? He asked. She smiled faintly. Because someone has to be. He rose slowly, his reflection merging with hers in the dim candlelight. You really are something, Mara. She turned away, hiding the warmth in her chest. Get some rest, Mr. Vale. But as he stepped toward the back room, he paused. Call me Alexander. Her eyes met his one last time before the light flickered again. Good night, Alexander. He nodded, disappearing into the shadows, carrying with him the strange, burning ache of a man who'd spent a lifetime untouched. Until now. And as the storm quieted outside, neither of them realized that something far more dangerous than rain had already begun to fall. The morning broke soft and blue over the small town, steam rising from puddles as the sun crept over the hills. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee filled the air once again. Mara moved quietly behind the counter, tying her apron, her hair still damp from the drizzle outside. She wasn't sure why her chest felt lighter than usual, but she knew it had something to do with the man asleep in the back room. Alexander Vale, billionaire, empire builder. A man whose name appeared in headlines next to words like acquisition and layoff, had spent the night on a cot meant for deliveries. She still couldn't quite believe it. When she peeked through the curtain, he was already awake, sitting on the edge of the cot with his jacket folded beside him. His hair was tousled, his sleeves rolled, and there was a quiet stillness in his expression that didn't belong to the man the world thought it knew. "Coffee's ready," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "So you're here early. I open at 6. People need caffeine before they can face their lives." He smiled faintly. "Then you might be the most important person in this town." She laughed under her breath. If only it paid like it. He followed her into the diner, and for a moment he just stood there, taking in the light. The smell of coffee and pancakes. The quiet hum of a jukebox that hadn't worked, right in years. "I don't remember the last time I woke up. Somewhere that didn't smell like glass and steel," he said. "You make that sound like a bad thing," she replied. Handing him a cup, he took a sip and winced. "Still bitter. You'll live," she teased. "Real coffee doesn't ask for your approval." Their eyes met over the rim of his cup, and something unspoken passed between them again, that dangerous pull neither of them wanted to name. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, breaking the spell. A small boy ran in, drenched from the knees down, his school bag swinging behind him. "Morning, Miss Mara," he called, sliding into his usual booth. "Morning, Jamie," she said, her tone softening instantly. "You're soaked." "Did you walk here?" He nodded, grinning. The rain stopped halfway. "I didn't want to be late." "You'll catch a cold if you keep doing that," she warned. "Worth it," he said proudly. "Mom says your pancakes are magic." Alexander watched the exchange, his brow furrowed slightly, a look caught between curiosity and disbelief. "You make breakfast for kids before school?" he asked quietly. "Jamie's mum works the night shift at the hospital," Mara said, whisking batter in a bowl. "She drops him here before heading home to sleep. This way he eats something warm and gets help with his homework." "You do that for free?" She glanced at him. "Do you think a 7-year-old has a credit card?" He looked down, almost embarrassed. "Right, of course." Jamie waved at him from his booth. "Hi, mister." Alexander hesitated before waving back. "Hi," Mara smirked. "You don't have to look so terrified. He's not going to ask you for an investment." "I don't do well with kids," Alexander admitted. "They're just people without filters," she said. "You might like them." He didn't answer. But as she walked over to Jamie's booth with a plate of pancakes, he found himself watching the scene unfold, her kneeling beside the boy, the way she smiled when he showed her his spelling test, the way she praised him like it mattered more than any corporate milestone. When she returned to the counter, he was still looking. "What?" she asked, drying her hands on her apron. He hesitated. "Nothing. It's just, you talk to him like what he says actually matters." "It does," she said simply. "Most people just need to feel seen." He swallowed hard. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy. It's a choice." For the first time, he looked uncertain, like a man who'd spent his whole life commanding rooms and suddenly realized he didn't know how to exist in one that didn't need his power. The door opened again, and a tall man in a grey suit walked in, shaking the rain off his umbrella. He spotted Alexander instantly and froze. "Sir?" Mara blinked. "Friend of yours?" Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "Unfortunately, yes." The man hurried over. "Mr. Vale, thank God. We've been searching for you since last night. The board is in chaos at the New York office." "James," Alexander interrupted quietly. "Not here." James looked around, clearly uncomfortable in the small-town diner with its cracked booths and faint smell of syrup. "Of course, sir, but your flight—" "I'm not leaving yet," Alexander said firmly. James frowned. "Sir, your schedule—" "Cancel it." Mara's eyes flicked between them. She could feel the shift in air, the intrusion of another world into hers. James looked at her, then at Alexander, clearly trying to understand why his boss, one of the most powerful men in the country, was sitting in a place like this. "May I ask?" James said, lowering his voice. "What exactly we're doing here?" Alexander's answer was quiet but steady. "Breathing," James blinked. "Breathing, sir." Alexander nodded. You should try it sometime." Mara bit back a smile. James sighed, adjusting his tie. "Very well, sir. But the press has already noticed your absence. I'll be outside when you're ready." When he left, Alexander exhaled slowly, as if letting out years of tension. "You just told a man in a $10,000 suit to wait outside in the rain," Mara said, half amused. "I've told worse men worse things," he said, sipping his coffee again. "Still bitter?" He smiled faintly. "Still perfect." The diner fell quiet again, save for the hum of rain against the windows. Mara leaned closer, her voice softer. "You know you don't have to run back to your world just because it's looking for you." He looked up, eyes dark and unreadable. "And if I told you I didn't want to?" She blinked, her heart skipping once, then again. "Then I'd say you're playing with fire." He smiled, but there was no arrogance in it this time, just honesty. "Maybe I want to see if it burns." She shook her head, turning away before he could see her blush. "You're impossible. And you're dangerous," he said quietly. "For a waitress?" she asked, half laughing. "For a man who's forgotten how to feel." Outside, James paced by the car, unaware that in that little diner, something far more powerful than any fortune was being set in motion. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Vale didn't care who was waiting for him. By the next afternoon, word had spread through the small town that the stranger in the expensive car hadn't left. He was still there, still sitting in that corner booth of Mara's diner, still drinking her terrible coffee and pretending. He didn't have an empire waiting for him. Beyond the hills, Mara noticed the whispers. First, the curious glances from locals who'd never seen a suit like his outside of television. Yet she also noticed something else. He didn't flinch anymore. The man who used to command boardrooms now sat quietly beside truckers and teachers, answering their small talk with surprising gentleness. He had started helping her too. He wiped tables, carried boxes, fixed the broken light above the register, with the calm focus of someone trying to remember what it felt like to be useful. "Careful," she told him one morning as he carried a tray of coffee cups to a booth. "If you get too good at that, I'll start paying you minimum wage," he smirked. "I've worked for worse." The bell above the door jingled, and a woman in a crisp blue suit stepped in. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile, her hair pinned in a perfect bun. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath. "Mr. Vale," she said, her tone cutting through the hum of conversation like a knife. "You've been very difficult to reach." Mara turned, surprised by the icy familiarity in the woman's voice. Alexander straightened slightly. "Charlotte, I assume this couldn't wait." "I flew here," she said flatly. "Does that answer your question?" Mara busied herself behind the counter, pretending not to listen. But every word echoed. Charlotte placed a file on the counter in front of him. "You're missing 3 executive meetings, 2 interviews, and 1 gala tonight. Investors are restless." "I'm restless. The board wants to know if you've lost your mind." He glanced at Mara before replying, "Maybe I finally found it." Charlotte's expression hardened. "So this is where you've been?" "Hiding in a diner with..." Her eyes flicked toward Mara, disdain barely concealed. Mara froze, her face flushed. Alexander's tone sharpened instantly. "Don't finish that sentence." Charlotte hesitated, thrown off balance by his tone. "Alex, it's Alexander," he said coldly. The room went silent. The rain outside began again, faint but steady. Mara turned away, pretending to rearrange sugar jars. She hated being the reason for that tension, the reason 2 people from a world far beyond hers were standing in her diner, arguing like something sacred was at stake. Charlotte's voice lowered, but the edge remained. "You disappear for 48 hours, and the company starts bleeding money. We've got headlines forming already. Billionaire missing, Vale Enterprises in crisis. Do you understand what that means?" He leaned back, his voice quiet but firm. "It means the world spins just fine without me." Charlotte blinked, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "You built that empire. You are the company." He looked down at his hands. "Maybe that's the problem?" Charlotte followed his gaze to Mara, and her jaw tightened. "So this is it then? You're throwing everything away for her?" The words hit the room like a slap. Mara flinched but didn't speak. Alexander's voice was calm, but it carried weight. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just remembering why I started." Charlotte's composure cracked for just a second. "Do you have any idea how much they'll tear you apart for this?" "The press, the shareholders, let them," he interrupted. Charlotte exhaled slowly, fury restrained by professionalism. "You're making a mistake, maybe," he said quietly. "But for the first time, it's my mistake to make." Without another word, She picked up her umbrella and walked out, her heels echoing like gunshots on the wet pavement. The door closed, leaving silence behind. Mara wiped her hands on her apron, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't have to defend me like that." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Yes, I did. She's right, though," Mara said. "You don't belong here." He took a step closer. Maybe I don't belong anywhere else." She hesitated, her heart pounding. "You can't mean that." "I do," he said simply. "This place, you remind me what life feels like when it's not about power or money or control. You look at me and see a man, not a title." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "And that scares you, doesn't it?" He smiled faintly. "Terrifies me." The way he said it, quiet, vulnerable, honest, made her chest ache. "I'm not what you think," she whispered. "I'm not someone who can change a man like you." "You already have," he said. Before she could answer, the door creaked open again. It was Jamie, the little boy, clutching a drenched notebook to his chest. "Miss Mara," he said, breathless. "I forgot my spelling book." She crouched to help him, her voice softening again, instantly shifting into the warmth Alexander had come to crave. He watched her as she wiped rain from the boy's face and tied his jacket hood properly. She wasn't pretending to care, she just did. When Jamie ran back out, she turned and found Alexander still watching her. "What?" she asked gently. He smiled. "You make the world feel possible." She looked down, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. "You should go before you say something you can't take back." He stepped closer. "Maybe I already did." Their eyes met, hers full of fear and longing, his of something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The rain outside blurred everything beyond the glass, turning the world into a painting of light and shadow. "Mara," he said softly, her name carrying the weight of everything he couldn't yet admit. But before he could take another step, a car engine roared outside. The sound of expensive tires cutting through water. Charlotte's black sedan pulled up again, and a man in a grey suit stepped out, holding a newspaper under his coat. He entered the diner, soaked but composed, and placed the paper on the counter. The headline was bold: "Vale Empire crashes, billionaire vanishes in small-town scandal." Mara's eyes widened. Alexander stared at the paper, his jaw tightening. Charlotte hadn't been bluffing. The world had already found him, and for the first time, Mara realized kindness might have saved him from loneliness, but love could ruin them both. By the time evening fell, the town had begun to hum with rumors. The story spread from one diner booth to another, from the gas station attendant to the woman at the post office. The billionaire who'd lost everything was still here, sitting quietly in the same small-town cafe where it had all started to unravel. Mara locked the door early that night. The newspaper with the headline lay crumpled in the trash, though the words refused to leave her mind. She tried to clean, to distract herself, but every time she passed the booth where Alexander sat, she felt that same ache, a pull between what she wanted and what she feared. He hadn't said much since the article appeared. He just sat there, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup gone cold, staring through the reflection in the window as if watching a world that no longer wanted him. "You should call them," she said finally. "Who?" "The people you work with. They're probably panicking." He didn't look up. "They already were. Panic is the only thing that moves people in my world." She wiped the counter, her tone quiet but sharp. "And what about you? What moves you?" He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, she saw it, the loneliness that money couldn't bury, the exhaustion of a man who had spent his entire life proving he was untouchable. "Not what?" he said softly. "Who?" Her heart stuttered. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say things like that." He stood slowly, closing the distance between them. "You asked what moves me, Mara. It's you. It's the way you talk to people like they matter. The way you make this broken place feel alive." She shook her head. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "Enough to know that I haven't felt something real in years." She wanted to step back, to put distance between them, but her body didn't listen. The air between them was charged, heavy with everything they weren't saying. "Alexander," she whispered, "you're not thinking clearly. You've lost your company. Your name's in every newspaper, and you're standing here looking at me like I can fix any of that." He reached out, his voice low and steady. "You already did." Her breath caught. "You can't build your redemption on me. "I'm not," he said. "I'm just remembering what it feels like to care." The rain started again, tapping against the windows like soft applause from the night. Somewhere outside, thunder murmured, but the sound was distant, irrelevant. "You should go," she said finally, forcing the words out even though her voice trembled. "Before this gets harder." "I can't," he said. "Not yet." She turned away. "You don't belong here." "Maybe belonging isn't about where you start," he said quietly. "Maybe it's about where someone lets you stay." That broke something inside her. She pressed her hands against the counter, trying to breathe. He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of rain and coffee on his shirt. "Mara," he said softly. She turned toward him, and before she could speak, he kissed her, not out of impulse, but out of something deeper. The kiss was slow, trembling, full of the kind of hesitation that only comes from people who've lived too long without gentleness. When they parted, her eyes glistened in the dim light. "You shouldn't have done that." "I know," he said. "But I needed to remember what truth felt like." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't understand what this means. You're a billionaire, Alexander. I serve coffee in a town that doesn't exist on your maps." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were wet. "Then maybe I've been looking at the wrong map." The sound of an approaching car broke the stillness. Headlights swept across the front windows, blinding them for a second. Mara stepped back, instinctively putting distance between them again. Outside, a black SUV stopped by the curb. Two men in dark coats stepped out. Corporate security, the kind who only appeared when money and power collided with chaos. "They found you," she whispered. He turned, his jaw tightening. "Of course they did." The door opened, and one of the men stepped inside, his voice crisp. "Mr. Vale, the board is convening tonight in Chicago. They've frozen your accounts and initiated emergency control. We need to leave immediately." Mara froze behind the counter, trying not to move. Alexander's voice was calm, almost cold. "Tell them I'll call in the morning." "Sir," the man said, lowering his tone, "if you don't return now, you won't have a company to come back to." Alexander didn't even flinch. "Maybe that's what I need." The man hesitated, confused. "Sir, with all due respect—" "Go wait outside," Alexander said sharply. The men exchanged glances but obeyed, stepping back into the rain. When the door shut again, he turned to Mara. "You see," she said softly, "that's your world. It'll never stop chasing you." He exhaled. "Then maybe it's time I stop running toward it." Her eyes met his. "And what about me?" He smiled sadly. "You're the first thing I don't want to lose." She wanted to tell him to stop, that he was making promises he couldn't keep, that people like him didn't stay in towns like this. But the words wouldn't come. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small silver watch, elegant, understated, the kind of object that carried more meaning than money. "This was my father's," he said quietly. "He gave it to me before I built everything that now feels worthless." He placed it gently on the counter in front of her. "I don't have anything real left, Mara, except this and you." She stared at the watch, then at him. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because it's the first time in my life I've wanted to leave something that matters behind." Her eyes burned with tears she couldn't stop. "Alexander, if you walk out that door now, they'll destroy you." He took her hand, his thumb brushing against her wrist. "Then let them try." The headlights outside flashed again. The men were waiting. He squeezed her hand once more before letting go. "Whatever happens, don't think of me as what I was. Think of me as the man who finally saw you." And with that, he turned and stepped into the rain. Mara stood frozen by the counter, the watch, still warm in her palm, the echo of his words lingering in the air like a vow. Fragile, impossible, and unforgettable. The following days blurred into silence. The diner felt emptier, colder, as if the walls themselves remembered him. Mara went through her routines with mechanical precision, pouring coffee, wiping counters, pretending not to glance at the door every time the bell rang. Alexander Vale had vanished again. She'd seen his name once more in the papers, not in the business section this time, but in scandal columns. Vale Empire under investigation. Board seizes control. Unstable leadership threatens future of one of America's largest corporations. The headlines all read the same way. A powerful man undone by emotion. But what none of them wrote, what only she knew, was that he had left willingly. Sometimes in the early mornings before the first customer arrived, she'd take the silver watch from the drawer under the counter and wind it. Its ticking filled the quiet space, rhythmic, almost human. She would stare at its face and wonder if somewhere in one of his tall glass buildings he could still hear it too. It was a week later when the first black car appeared again outside the diner. Mara's heart jumped, but when the door opened, it wasn't Alexander, it was Charlotte, the woman from before, polished and cold as ever. Her heels clicked against the floor like a warning. "Mara, isn't it?" she said, removing her sunglasses. Mara's grip tightened on the coffee pot. "You remember?" Charlotte smiled, but it wasn't kind. Hard to forget the reason a man like Alexander Vale threw away his company. Mara set the pot down. He didn't throw it away. He walked away. "Semantics," Charlotte said, sitting at the counter. "You cost him billions. I hope that's worth a smile." Mara's jaw tightened. "He made his own choices." Charlotte leaned in. "He's been missing for 3 days." That made Mara's breath catch. "Missing?" Charlotte nodded slowly. "He hasn't returned calls, hasn't shown up to meetings, his apartment's empty, his phone's off. You're the last person known to have seen him." Mara's throat went dry. "I don't know where he is." Charlotte studied her face as if searching for cracks. "You really don't, do you?" "I wish I did." Charlotte exhaled sharply. For the first time, the mask slipped. Not much, but enough. "I tried to stop him. I told him this." She gestured vaguely toward the diner. The town, the nothingness beyond the windows, would destroy him. But he said he'd rather lose everything than live without meaning. Mara looked away. Then maybe he finally understood what life is. Charlotte's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Do you know what it's like to watch someone so brilliant ruin himself because of a feeling?" Mara met her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to watch someone so brilliant finally become human?" The silence that followed was heavy. Charlotte stood abruptly, straightening her jacket. "If he reaches out, tell him he has 72 hours before the board names a permanent replacement. After that, Vale Enterprises won't exist anymore." Mara's voice trembled. "Would you even care?" Charlotte hesitated by the door. "He built something bigger than any of us, but the truth is, none of us knew him. Not really." And then she left. Mara watched her car disappear into the distance, her pulse still uneven. She sat at the counter, staring at the reflection of the rain on the window, the ticking of the watch echoing softly in the empty room. She thought of the way he had looked at her that last night, like she was the only thing left in the world worth remembering. And for the first time, she was afraid she might never see that look again. Night came early, painting the town in shades of amber and grey. She turned off the lights, locked the doors, and started her walk home. The streets were quiet, the air cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Her boots splashed in puddles as she passed the old post office, the library, the darkened store windows that reflected her silhouette back at her. Then, just as she turned the corner toward her small apartment above the florist's shop, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Her breath caught. He was standing under the awning of a closed bookstore, his clothes damp, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. And yet, when he saw her, he smiled. "Alexander." He exhaled like a man surfacing after drowning. "I didn't know where else to go." She ran to him without thinking, the anger and relief colliding all at once. "Where have you been? They said you disappeared." "I needed time," he said softly. "Time to figure out if what I want is still worth fighting for." "And?" He looked at her and truly looked, and she knew the answer before he spoke. "It is." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You can't just show up like this. Your world is falling apart, Alexander. You have people looking for you. I don't care," he said, stepping closer. "I've spent my whole life being everything they expected. This is the first time I've done something for me." She tried to stay angry, but the way he said it, raw, trembling, almost broken, disarmed her completely. "You don't belong here," she said again, though the conviction was gone. He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I belong with you." Her voice faltered. "Don't say that. It's the only truth I've got left," he said. "Everything else, the empire, the money, the power, it was noise. You're the quiet I never knew I needed." She felt her throat tighten. "And what happens when the quiet ends? Then I'll fight to keep it." They stood there under the streetlight, rain dripping from the awning above them, their breath mingling in the chill air. The rest of the world felt impossibly far away. Finally, she whispered, "What do you want from me, Alexander?" He took her hands gently, his eyes glimmering in the half-light. "Not your forgiveness, not even your love, just a chance to start over. Somewhere where it doesn't matter who I was." She looked at him for a long time before answering. "If you mean that, then stop running from your past. Fix what's broken. Not for me, for you." He nodded slowly, understanding. The wind shifted, scattering raindrops between them. "I'll try," he said. "Promise me you will," she whispered. "I promise," and for the first time, she believed him. But as he turned to leave, the distant sound of sirens began to rise, faint at first, then closer, louder, until it echoed down the narrow street. Alexander froze. Mara's heart sank. "Please," she said, voice trembling. "Tell me this isn't for you." He met her eyes, rain streaking down his face like tears. "It always is." And before she could reach for him, two black cars turned the corner, red and blue lights flashing against the wet pavement. His world, had come to collect what it thought still belonged to it. The red and blue lights painted the wet street in trembling streaks of color. The rain intensified, blurring everything except the figures moving in it. Men in dark suits, voices echoing through the storm, the flash of cameras from somewhere far down the road. Mara's hands shook as Alexander stepped forward. His silhouette stood tall against the chaos, but there was something defeated in his shoulders. A quiet acceptance, the kind that comes when a man finally stops running. "Alexander Vale?" one of the men called out. "You're wanted for questioning regarding the financial collapse of Vale Enterprises. Please come with us." Mara's voice broke through the rain. "Questioning?" He turned, his hand brushing her arm, a small, desperate gesture to keep her calm. "It's all right." "No, it's not," she said, eyes wide. "You didn't do anything wrong." He smiled faintly. "That's not how power works, Mara. When you stop playing their game, they rewrite the rules." The man approached, flashing credentials, but Mara stepped in front of Alexander instinctively. "You can't just take him like this." The officer's tone remained professional but distant. "Ma'am, please step aside." She didn't move. "Mara," Alexander said softly. "It's fine. I'll handle it." "Handle it," she snapped. "They're treating you like a criminal." He exhaled, lowering his head toward her ear. "Let them. It's better than living like one." She froze. He took her hand briefly, tightly, his eyes finding hers one last time through the rain. "Keep the watch," he whispered. "It'll help me find my way back." And then he stepped past her into the waiting car. The door closed. The world seemed to collapse into silence. Mara stood in the rain long after the cars disappeared down the narrow road. The sirens faded. The town returned to stillness. But something inside her had changed. Something she couldn't name, something heavy and unyielding. For the next few days, she tried to live as if nothing had happened. The diner reopened. The regulars came and went. But every cup she poured, every smile she forced felt empty. The silver watch lay on the counter beside the register, its ticking too loud in the quiet hours. Then, one morning, a stranger entered the diner, an older man, polished but kind-eyed, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression that didn't match the sharpness of his suit. "Are you Mara?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. "Who's asking?" He set the briefcase down and opened it carefully, revealing a folder thick with documents and a sealed envelope. "My name is Daniel Reese. I'm Alexander Vale's attorney." Her breath caught. Is he all right?" Daniel hesitated. "He's alive, but things have changed." He slid the envelope across the counter. "He asked me to give you this if he couldn't come back himself." Mara stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, deliberate, but with the faint tremor of a man who had finally allowed himself to feel. "Mara, if you're reading this, I'm where I deserve to be, facing the world I built with my own hands. But for once, I don't regret it. You showed me that the truth isn't something to hide behind numbers or steal, but something you find in small places, in people who choose kindness even when it costs them. You taught me that love isn't about possession, it's about presence. And even if I never see you again, you'll be in every quiet moment I learn to live honestly. The watch was never meant to keep time. It was meant to remind me that time means nothing without someone to share it with. Yours, Alexander. Mara's hands trembled as she folded the letter back. Her vision blurred, not from sadness, but from the strange, fragile beauty of what he had written. "Where is he?" she asked finally. Daniel sighed. "Earned custody. Temporarily. He refused to appeal. He said he wanted to take responsibility." Responsibility for what? For becoming the kind of man he swore he never would. Her chest ached. "Can I see him?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "I can arrange it." 3 days later, Mara found herself in a sterile hallway of glass and concrete, the kind of place Alexander once ruled over, but now stood behind. The sound of her footsteps echoed as an officer led her through a door and into a small visiting room. He was already there, sitting at a metal table, his posture straight, but his eyes gentler than she remembered. When he saw her, he smiled, and a tired, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Mara," her throat tightened. "You look human," he finished, amused. "Different," she said softly. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. "They think they broke me. But you can't break what's finally real." She swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here," he shook his head. "For once, I'm exactly where I should be. Facing the wreckage, owning it." She felt tears sting her eyes. "You could have walked away." "I already did once," he said quietly. "And I walked toward you instead. That's what changed everything." They sat in silence for a long moment, just looking at each other through the glass. She wished she could reach out, but maybe it was better this way. No illusions, no escapes, just truth. "When you get out," she whispered. "What then?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll come home." "Home?" she repeated. He nodded. "If you'll still have me." Her tears finally fell. "So you already know the answer." He pressed his palm lightly to the glass. She lifted hers, matching it. The glass was cold, but the connection was real, more real than anything they'd ever shared. "I'll wait," she said. He closed his eyes briefly, a quiet relief crossing his face. "That's all I needed to hear." The officer cleared his throat, signaling that time was up. Mara stood, her fingers trailing from the glass. She wanted to say something more, something profound, something that could bridge the worlds between them, but no words came, and maybe they didn't need to. As she turned to leave, she heard him call softly after her, "Mara." She looked back. He smiled. "Keep the coffee warm," she laughed through her tears. "Always." When she stepped back into the sunlight, she realized something. Love doesn't always save you from the storm. Sometimes it just teaches you how to stand in the rain and still see the beauty in it. And as she walked away, the watch in her pocket ticked steadily, as if somewhere inside that sound, time had already started healing. Months passed. The seasons shifted. Spring returned to the small town, carrying with it the faint scent of lilacs and the soft hum of renewal. Mara's diner stood much as it always had, a place of warmth in a world that often forgot how to be kind. Yet something inside it had changed. The locals noticed first. The music played a little softer now. The flowers on the counter were always fresh. And every morning before opening, Mara would take out the silver watch and set it carefully by the register, its steady rhythm filling the quiet space. She no longer looked at it as a reminder of what she'd lost, but as proof of what she'd found. A love that didn't vanish even when it was far away. She didn't hear much from Alexander during those months. Just one letter in late spring, written in that same deliberate handwriting. "I'm learning to live without walls. I wake up early now. I read more than I ever did. Sometimes I cook, though the coffee tastes terrible without you to make it right. I don't know what waits for me when I leave this place. But I do know that for the first time in my life, I want to be worthy of something I didn't buy, you." The letter ended simply, without a promise, without a plea, just a quiet truth that settled into her heart and stayed there. Every day after, she kept the diner running, helping neighbors, tutoring Jamie after school, bringing food to the hospital night staff who often forgot to eat. Life continued in small, ordinary ways, the kind of ways that mattered most. Then one bright afternoon in early summer, as the sun painted gold streaks across the floor, the bell above the door chimed. Mara turned automatically. a polite greeting on her lips, and froze. He stood there, framed by the light. No longer the sharp-edged billionaire who had once walked into her life with the arrogance of a man who owned the world. His hair was longer now, his suit simpler, his expression calm in a way she had never seen before. "Alexander," she breathed. He smiled, his voice low and warm. "You kept the place exactly the same," she laughed softly, the sound trembling. "It's not the kind of place that changes easily." He stepped closer, taking in every detail, the counter, the old jukebox, the smell of fresh coffee. "Neither are you." She folded her arms, fighting the rising emotion. "So, how long do you plan to stay this time?" He met her gaze, eyes full of quiet certainty. "As long as you'll let me." The words hung in the air, not dramatic, not grand, but real. Mara felt something inside her soften, like a door finally opening after a long winter. She looked at him carefully, searching for the man she had known, the restless power, the guarded pride, and found instead something new. Humility, peace, gratitude. "You're different," she said. He nodded. "You were right. I couldn't fix what was broken by running from it. I had to face it. But when I did, all I could think about was coming back here, to the one person who saw me before I did." Tears blurred her vision. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," he said gently. "That's why it means everything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a folded napkin, the kind from her diner, with faint handwriting across it. She took it, unfolding it slowly. The words were simple, written in ink that had smudged slightly. "Would you let me start over here?" "With you?" Her breath caught. She looked up, but he wasn't smiling arrogantly like he used to. He was waiting, truly waiting, his heart on the line. Mara set the napkin down and reached for his hand. "You don't need to start over," she said softly. "You already began the day you walked in here." He exhaled, relief breaking across his face like sunlight after a storm. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the world outside seemed to fade, the distant traffic, the sound of laughter from the street, leaving only the soft ticking of the silver watch on the counter. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice trembling with a smile. He grinned. "Always." She poured him a cup just like she had that first day. The smell rose between them, rich and familiar, and for a second, time seemed to fold, as if every hardship, every tear, every moment of doubt had led them right here, back to this small corner of the world where love was simple, quiet and real. He took a sip and winced. "Still bitter," he murmured. "You'll live," she said, laughing through her tears. He reached across the counter and took her hand, holding it firmly this time, not as a plea or apology, but as a promise. "I already am," he said. The afternoon light shifted, bathing them both in gold. For the first time in years, Alexander Vale wasn't thinking about wealth or legacy or redemption. He was simply here, in a place that had no reason to forgive him but did anyway. Outside, the sign on the diner window caught the light, and for a brief second, the reflection showed two people who had finally stopped running, not because they had found perfection, but because they had found peace. As the bell above the door rang softly in the breeze, Mara leaned against the counter, her voice gentle. "Welcome home, Alexander," he smiled. It always was. And as the silver watch ticked between them, not counting the seconds lost, but the moments reclaimed at the world for once, felt right. Subscribe if you still believe love can change people.